Hey everyone, tonight we're heading to the waterways of Mexico and Latin America, where rivers run dark and a woman's cry echoes through the night. This is the story of La Llorona, the Weeping Woman. Before we get started, go ahead and like this video and subscribe if you enjoy what we do here. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? And if you're from Mexico, Central America, or anywhere, La Llorona's legend is told. Have you heard her cry? Do you know someone who's encountered her? Maybe a story passed down from your grandmother, or something that happened to you that you still can't explain. I'd love to hear about it. Now settle in, maybe turn on a fan for some background noise, and let's ease into tonight's story together. When you think of La Llorona, you probably picture some Hollywood ghost in a white dress, maybe from a horror movie where she jumps out at teenagers near a river. The typical vengeful spirit with a tragic backstory, designed to make you clutch your popcorn for 90 minutes and then forget about her on the drive home. But the real La Llorona? She's so much more than that, because La Llorona isn't just a ghost story. She's a cultural wound that's been bleeding for over 500 years. She's colonialism and motherhood, and grief and guilt, all wrapped together in a wail that can stop your heart. And unlike most legends that fade with time, La Llorona is still here, still crying, still searching. People report hearing her voice every single year, from the rivers of Mexico City to the canals of San Antonio, from the beaches of El Salvador to suburban neighborhoods in Los Angeles, where Mexican families have made their homes. She's not a relic, she's active. And if you've heard her cry, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The legend of La Llorona goes back further than most people realize. Way before the Spanish arrived with their crosses and their conquest. The roots of this story stretch into the pre-Hispanic world, into the mythology of the Aztec Empire, into beliefs about motherhood and death, and the thin places where the living and the dead brush against each other. The Aztecs had a goddess named Cihuacotl. The name translates roughly to snake woman, or woman of the serpent. She was associated with fertility, midwives, and war. She was powerful, complicated, not entirely good, not entirely evil. The kind of deity that demanded respect because she could give life or take it away depending on her mood. According to Aztec belief, Cihuacotl would sometimes appear dressed in white, wandering through the streets and markets of Tenochtitlan at night, wailing and crying out in anguish. Her cry was a warning, an omen. When people heard it, they knew something terrible was coming. Famine, war, death, the kind of collective suffering that reshapes entire civilizations. The goddess was also connected to women who died in childbirth. The Aztecs believed these women, called Cihuateteo, became divine warriors. They accompanied the sun on its journey across the sky. They were honored, feared, and mourned. But they were also dangerous. They would sometimes return to the world of the living, appearing at crossroads, causing illness in children, driving people mad with their presence. So the idea of a weeping woman, a dangerous female spirit, connected to motherhood and death and night, that wasn't invented by the Spanish. That was already here. The bones of the legend were already in place, carved into the stone temples and whispered in the prayers of midwives and mothers who knew how thin the line between life and death could be. Then the Spanish arrived in 1519, and everything changed. The conquest of Mexico wasn't just a military campaign. It was a cultural apocalypse. Millions died from disease, warfare, and forced labor. Entire civilizations were erased. Languages disappeared. Gods were replaced. And the survivors had to figure out how to exist in a world that had been turned inside out. The Spanish brought Catholicism with them, of course. And one of the first things they did was demonize indigenous beliefs. Goddesses like Cihuacotl, once honored as powerful divine figures, were recast as witches, demons, warnings of sin. The crying woman went from being an omen from the gods to being a damned soul, a cautionary tale, a punishment for transgression. And somewhere in that violent collision of cultures, in the trauma and grief and desperate attempts to make sense of a world that no longer made sense, the modern legend of La Llorona was born. The most common version of the story, the one that's been told and retold across Mexico and throughout Latin America for centuries, goes something like this. There was a beautiful woman. Depending on who's telling the story, her name might be Maria, or it might be something else. Or she might not have a name at all, because in a way, she's every woman who's ever suffered this particular kind of loss. She was poor, or maybe she was wealthy, but fell in love with someone beneath her station. Or maybe she was indigenous and fell in love with a Spanish man. The details change, but the core remains the same. She loved someone who didn't love her back the way she deserved. She had children with this man, usually 2, sometimes 3, beautiful children, the best parts of her, everything she had to give. And then the man left. Maybe he married someone else, someone of the right social class, someone who could advance his position. Maybe he just got bored. Maybe he never intended to stay in the first place, but he left. And he made it clear he wasn't coming back. Different versions of the story handle what happens next in different ways, but they all arrive at the same horrible destination. In some versions, she's so consumed by rage and grief that she drowns her children in the river, wanting to hurt the man who abandoned her in the only way she knows will actually wound him, by taking away his offspring. In other versions, she's so lost in her pain that she neglects the children and they wander to the river on their own and drown while she's not paying attention. In still others, the man himself murders the children to be free of his obligations, and she discovers their bodies in the water. But regardless of how it happens, the children die in the water. And when she realizes what she's done, or what's happened, or what's been taken from her, she loses her mind completely. She drowns herself in the same river, or she dies of grief, or she simply ceases to be the person she was and becomes something else entirely, a walking wound, a manifestation of guilt and loss and maternal love twisted into something monstrous. And now she wanders, forever, searching for her children, crying out for them, unable to rest, unable to move on, unable to do anything except repeat the same desperate search night after night after night for centuries. "Ay, Miss Hios," she wails. "Oh, my children." That's her cry. That's the sound that people report hearing. Sometimes it's distant, like it's coming from miles away. Sometimes it's so close it sounds like she's standing right behind you. But it's always the same cry. Always the same desperate, agonized plea. And here's the thing that makes La Llorona particularly terrifying. She doesn't know her children are dead. Or she knows, but can't accept it. So when she sees children near water, especially at night, she thinks they might be hers. And she tries to take them. Now let's talk about what La Llorona actually looks like, because this is where the legend gets really interesting, and where regional variations start to matter. In almost every version, she wears white, a long white dress or gown, usually described as flowing, almost luminous in the dark. Some say it's a wedding dress, representing the marriage that never was, or the life that was stolen from her. Others say it's a burial shroud. Still others say it's just what she was wearing the night she died. Her hair is long and black. Sometimes it's loose and wild, streaming behind her as she moves. Sometimes it's wet, dripping water, even when she's far from the river. Sometimes it's tangled with river weeds and debris. Her face is where things get complicated. Some say she's beautiful, heartbreakingly beautiful. That's how she lures children close. They see a lovely woman in distress and want to help her. Only when they get close enough do they see the truth. Others say her face is skeletal, flesh rotted away by centuries in the water, eyes like empty sockets or burning coals, mouth twisted in an eternal scream. Still others say her face changes depending on who's looking at her and what they need to see. beautiful from a distance, horrifying up close, a trick, a trap. Many accounts mention a veil, a translucent veil covering her face, like a bride or a widow. You can sort of see through it, but not clearly. And that uncertainty, that not quite seeing, that's almost worse than seeing her face clearly would be. She's always near water. Rivers, canals, lakes, irrigation ditches, even drainage channels in cities. Anywhere water flows, that's where she appears. She needs the water. It's part of her now. Some say she emerges from it, dripping and cold. Others say she walks along the banks, pacing, searching. Her movement is strange. Some witnesses say she glides rather than walks, her feet never quite touching the ground. Others say she moves in a way that doesn't match normal human locomotion too fast in some moments, impossibly slow in others, as if time moves differently for her. And then there's her cry, the wail, the sound that gives her her name. People who've heard it say it's unlike anything else. It's not just sad. It's not just grief. It's a sound that goes straight through your chest and grabs your heart. It's ancient and raw and so full of pain that even if you don't understand Spanish, even if you don't know the story, you know immediately that this is the sound of someone who's lost everything. Ay, mis hijos. ¿Dónde están mis hijos? Oh, my children. Where are my children? Some say the cry starts soft and distant, then gets louder as she gets closer. Others say it's loudest when she's far away and gets quieter as she approaches, which is somehow worse because you don't know when she's right behind you. The cry can carry for miles on a quiet night. People report hearing it from inside their homes, through closed windows, over the sound of traffic or television. It cuts through everything. It demands attention. And if you hear it, the traditional wisdom says, don't follow it. Don't investigate. Don't try to help. Because La Llorona doesn't want help. She wants company. She wants children to replace the ones she lost. And if you're close enough to hear her clearly, you're already in danger. Let's talk about the different origin stories, because like I said, the details shift depending on who's telling it and where. And these variations matter because they reflect different cultural anxieties, different historical traumas, different ways of processing the same fundamental grief. Version 1. The Indigenous Woman and the Spanish Conquistador. In this version, which is probably the oldest post-conquest telling, La Llorona was an indigenous woman who fell in love with the Spanish conquistador. He promised her the world, made her believe they had a future together. She had his children. But Spanish colonial society was rigidly hierarchical. Indigenous people occupied the lowest rungs. Mixed-race children were legally defined as inferior. The conquistador's family would never accept her. His social ambitions required a proper Spanish wife, so he married someone else, someone from Spain, someone with the right bloodline. And he told the indigenous woman that their children were inconvenient, embarrassing, evidence of his moral failing. In her rage and despair, she drowned the children in the river. Or in some versions, he had them killed to erase the evidence of his relationship with her. And she, mad with grief, drowned herself. This version is about colonialism and racial violence and the impossible position indigenous women were put in. It's about how conquest doesn't just happen on battlefields. It happens in bedrooms and cradles. It happens to the children who are born into a world that sees them as mistakes. Version 2. The wealthy woman and the poor man. In this version, the class dynamics are reversed. La Llorona was a wealthy woman, maybe the daughter of a landowner or merchant. She fell in love with a poor man, a farmer, a laborer, someone completely inappropriate by her family's standards. Her family forbade the relationship, threatened to disown her. But she loved him. She ran away with him. They had children in poverty, far from her former life of comfort. Eventually, the man grew resentful. She'd given up everything for him, and he felt the weight of that sacrifice crushing him. Or maybe he simply stopped loving her. Or maybe he met someone else. When he left, she was destroyed. She'd sacrificed her entire world for him, and he'd thrown it back in her face. In her grief and rage, she killed the children who bound her to him. Then herself. This version is about class and sacrifice, and how love doesn't actually conquer all. It's about women who give up everything and end up with nothing. It's about the rage that comes from that kind of betrayal. Version 3. The cautionary tale, in this version, which became popular during the period of intense Catholicism in colonial Mexico. La Llorona was simply a vain, selfish woman who cared more about parties and admirers than about her own children. She'd leave them alone while she went out, neglect them in favor of her social life. One night, while she was out dancing or drinking or pursuing yet another man, her children wandered to the river and drowned. When she discovered what had happened, she was overwhelmed with guilt. She'd been a terrible mother. She'd prioritized her own pleasure over their safety. And now they were dead because of her. She died of grief and guilt, and was condemned to wander forever as punishment for her maternal failure. This version is less sympathetic. It's a warning to mothers. Pay attention to your children. Prioritize them over everything else. Your job is to sacrifice. Your job is to suffer quietly. And if you don't, this is what happens. It's the most moralistic version, and probably the one that's been used most often to control women's behavior. Version 4. The murdered children. In this darker version, La Llorona didn't kill her children at all. Her husband or lover did, maybe to be free of the responsibility. Maybe in a rage. Maybe because he was simply evil. She discovered their bodies in the river. She tried to save them. She failed. And in her grief, she drowned herself to be with them. Now she wanders, not looking for her children exactly, but looking for justice, looking for revenge, taking other children as a way to make the world feel the loss she feels, making other parents understand her pain. This version is about how grief can transform into rage, how trauma can make victims into perpetrators, how cycles of violence perpetuate themselves across generations. Version 5. The pre-Hispanic goddess. Some scholars and storytellers argue that La Llorona isn't really a story about a specific woman at all. She's the Catholic transformation of Xochitl, the Aztec goddess, the crying woman who warned of disaster, the divine figure who represented the dangerous aspects of motherhood and femininity. In this reading, La Llorona is what happened when the Spanish tried to demonize indigenous spirituality. The goddess became a ghost. The divine warning became a cautionary tale. The complex spiritual figure became a one-dimensional villain. This version matters because it reminds us that La Llorona existed, in some form, before the conquest. That this isn't just a story invented by colonizers to control indigenous women. It's something older and deeper that was twisted and repurposed for new cultural anxieties. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. All of these versions coexist. None of them is the definitive story. And that's actually the point. La Llorona is whoever she needs to be. She's colonialism. She's class violence. She's maternal guilt. She's murdered innocence. She's female rage. She's grief that has no outlet. She's all of these things at once, because Latin American culture is all of these things at once complicated, traumatized, trying to process centuries of violence and loss. And she's still here, because the things she represents are still here. Let's talk about how La Llorona actually hunts, because yes, hunts is the right word. This isn't a passive haunting. She's not just a sad ghost who appears and scares people. She's actively looking for something. And if you're in her path, you need to understand the danger you're in. La Llorona appears primarily at night, usually between midnight and 3 a.m., that period the old beliefs call the dead hours, or the witching time. The world is quietest then. Fewer people around, less traffic. The boundary between the living world and the world of the dead is thinnest. She's drawn to water, as we've established. But she's also drawn to children, specifically children who are alone, near water at night, misbehaving or disobedient, crying or making noise that sounds like distress. The traditional warning in Mexican families is simple. Don't go near the river at night. Don't play by the canal after dark. Don't wander off alone when you can hear water flowing. Because if La Llorona finds you, she'll think you're one of hers, and should try to take you into the water. Here's how a typical encounter plays out based on countless reports across Latin America. You're near water at night. Maybe you're a child who snuck out. Maybe you're a teenager with friends, testing your courage. Maybe you're an adult walking home late, taking a shortcut along the river. First, you hear crying, soft at first. A woman's voice, sobbing. It sounds like someone in distress. Your instinct is to help, to investigate, to see if someone needs assistance. You move toward the sound. The crying gets louder. But here's the strange thing. It doesn't get clearer. It still sounds distant, even though you've moved closer. Like the source is always just ahead of you, just out of sight. You keep walking, and now you might see her. A figure in white near the water's edge. Her back is to you. She's hunched over, shoulders shaking with sobs. Her long black hair hangs down, covering her face and upper body. She looks fragile, vulnerable, human. You call out, "Señora? Esteban? Do you need help?" She doesn't respond, just keeps crying, keeps calling out, "Hey, Miss Hijos? Don Eston?" You move closer. You're close enough now to see details. Her white dress is wet, dripping. There's something wrong about the way she's standing. Too still, except for the shaking sobs, like a mannequin that's been posed. And then she turns. What happens next depends on which version of La Llorona you've encountered. In some accounts, her face is beautiful but wrong. Too pale, eyes too large, skin with a faint greenish tint, like something that's been underwater too long. She looks at you with desperate hope, reaching out with dripping hands, whispering, "Heirs tea? Are you mine?" In other accounts, her face is skeletal, flesh rotted away, leaving bone and gaping sockets where eyes should be. Her mouth opens impossibly wide, and that wail comes out, so loud and close that it feels like it's vibrating your bones. In still others, she's wearing a veil, and you can't see her face at all, which is somehow worse, because you can feel her looking at you through the fabric, studying you, deciding something. If you're a child, she'll try to grab you. Her hands are ice cold, strong, desperate. She'll pull you toward the water, murmuring promises. "Come with me. Come home. I've been looking for you. I've missed you so much." If you're an adult, especially if you're a parent, she might just stare at you. And in that stare is accusation, judgment. Are you taking care of your children? Do you appreciate what you have? Do you understand how easily it can all be taken away? Some people freeze. The fear is so complete that their bodies simply stop responding. They stand there, trapped in her gaze, unable to move or speak, or even breathe properly. Others run. And this is where it gets really strange. La Llorona doesn't chase in any normal sense. She doesn't run after you. But somehow, no matter how fast you move, she's always there. Behind you, beside you, appearing in your peripheral vision. You turn a corner, and she's there. You run down an alley, and she's at the other end. Distance doesn't seem to mean anything to her. The traditional wisdom says, if you encounter La Llorona, you pray. You invoke the Virgin Mary, the saints, whatever holy protection your faith provides. You don't look back. You don't engage with her. You get away from the water as fast as you can. And you don't stop until you're somewhere with people, with light, with noise and life, and the things that anchor you to the living world. Because if she gets hold of you, especially if you're a child, you'll end up in the water, and you might not come back out. Let's talk about the sound of her cry in more detail, because this deserves its own section. The cry is central to the legend. It's in the name, La Llorona, the weeping woman, the crier, and people who've heard it describe it in ways that are remarkably consistent across different times and places. The cry isn't just sad. Sadness doesn't cover it. It's grief so deep and raw that it sounds almost inhuman, like something that should come from an animal caught in a trap, or from the earth itself splitting open. Hey, Miss Hijos, those words, that wail, it cuts through everything. Through walls, through noise, through your attempts to ignore it. People report hearing it over the sound of parties, through car radios turned up loud, through closed windows and locked doors. It has a strange quality where it sounds simultaneously far away and very close. You might hear it and think she's miles down the river, but then you realize the sound is coming from right outside your window, or it's coming from inside your head, or it's coming from everywhere at once. The cry makes people feel things they don't want to feel. Survivors describe sudden overwhelming sadness, guilt about things they've done wrong in their lives, memories of loved ones they've lost, fear that goes beyond normal fear into something primal and paralyzing, a deep conviction that something terrible is about to happen. Children who hear it often start crying themselves, even if they don't know why. Parents report an instinctive urge to check on their children, to make sure they're safe, to hold them close. The cry can carry for miles on a still night. In rural areas, entire villages will hear it. Everyone stays inside, locks their doors, keeps their children close. No one goes out until sunrise, no matter what they need, no matter what they hear. In urban areas, the cry has been reported cutting through city noise. People in Mexico City, one of the largest metropolitan areas in the world, still report hearing La Llorona's wail near the canals in Xochimilco, near old waterways that have been partially paved over, even near the polluted river channels that barely count as water anymore. The cry doesn't care about modernity. It doesn't care that you don't believe in ghosts. It exists regardless of your skepticism. And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The cry affects different people differently based on their own experiences. Women who've lost children, whether through miscarriage, stillbirth, infant death, or having children taken away, often report that hearing La Llorona's cry brings back their own grief with overwhelming force. They say it sounds exactly like they felt in their worst moments, like someone gave voice to a pain they've been carrying silently. Parents in general report feeling judged by the cry, like it's asking them, "Are you being a good enough parent? Are you paying attention? Do you realize how precious and fragile your children are?" People who've experienced abandonment or betrayal report hearing accusation in the cry. Like La Llorona is crying, not just for her children, but for everyone who's ever been left behind, dismissed, treated as disposable. And children, especially young children who hear the cry without understanding the full legend, often report the strangest reaction. They want to help her. They want to go find her and tell her it's okay. They want to comfort her, which is, of course, exactly what makes the legend so dangerous. Now let's talk about specific documented encounters with La Llorona. Modern sightings, recent reports, evidence that this legend isn't just a historical curiosity, but an active, ongoing phenomenon. Xochimilco, Mexico City, 2018. A family was taking a late-night trajinera ride through the canals of Xochimilco. For those unfamiliar, Xochimilco is famous for its ancient canal system, remnants of the lake that once surrounded Tenochtitlan. It's also one of the most commonly reported locations for La Llorona sightings. According to their report, which was posted on several Mexican paranormal forums, they were the only boat on the water. It was past midnight, and most of the tourist activity had died down. They were drifting quietly, just talking and enjoying the moonlight on the water. Then they heard crying. A woman's voice, calling out in Spanish, "¿Dónde están mis hijos?" The sound was coming from somewhere up ahead, around a bend in the canal. The boat's pilot refused to keep going. Absolutely refused. He started pulling back the way they'd come. The father in the family got angry, said they paid for a full hour, demanded they keep going. The pilot said no amount of money was worth going toward that sound. As they argued, the crying got louder. And then they saw her, a figure in white, standing on one of the small islands between canals. Her back was to them, long black hair hanging down, arms raised toward the sky in a gesture of despair. The pilot pulled faster. The family went silent. And as they moved away, every person in that boat, mother, father, 3 children, and the pilot reported the same thing. They felt her looking at them. They couldn't see her face because her back was turned, but they all felt her attention lock onto them with an intensity that was almost physical. They made it back to the dock. The family left immediately. They never finished their hour-long tour, and according to the pilot's account, given months later to a researcher, all 3 children in that family had nightmares about a woman in white for weeks afterward. San Antonio, Texas, 2015. The San Antonio Riverwalk is a major tourist attraction. Modern, well-lit, constantly busy. Not the kind of place you'd expect ghost stories. But the San Antonio River has its own dark history, and La Llorona has been reported there multiple times over the years. In 2015, a security guard working a late shift at one of the riverside hotels reported an incident that was documented in the local news. He was doing his rounds around 2 a.m. when he heard a woman crying near the water. His first thought was that it was a tourist who'd had too much to drink or gotten separated from her group. He went to investigate, already preparing his speech about hotel security and getting back to your room safely. He found a woman in a white dress standing by the river's edge. She was soaked, dripping water onto the concrete walkway. At 2 a.m. in March, in 50-degree weather, he called out to her, asked if she needed help. She turned to look at him. He described her face as wrong. Not ugly, not monstrous, just wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Like her features didn't quite fit together properly. Like she was a drawing that someone had tried to copy from memory and gotten almost right, but not quite. She took a step toward him. He took several steps back, and then she opened her mouth, and that wail came out. He ran, left his post, got in his car, and drove home. Didn't come back for 3 days. Almost lost his job. The hotel reviewed security footage. They saw the guard running, but they didn't see anyone else. The cameras showed the walkway by the river, empty. Just the guard, standing there, staring at nothing, and then running like his life depended on it. He never worked nights again. Transferred to day shift as soon as a position opened up. And he tells anyone who'll listen. La Llorona is real, and she's in San Antonio. Guatemala City, 2019. This account comes from a bus driver who works the late routes through Guatemala City. He was interviewed by a local television station after multiple passengers recorded the same incident. He was driving his usual route around 1 a.m., mostly empty bus. Just a few passengers headed home from late shifts. The route goes past one of the city's old drainage canals. He saw a woman in white standing by the side of the road near the canal. She was waving at the bus, trying to flag him down. Against his better judgment, he'd grown up with the stories. He knew better. He stopped. The woman approached the bus, got on, dripping water everywhere. She sat in the front row, right behind him. He looked at her in the mirror. Long wet hair covering her face. White dress soaked through. Feet bare and caked with mud. She said, very quietly, "Has visto a mis hijos? Have you seen my children?" He didn't answer, focused on driving. Hands tight on the wheel. She kept talking, kept asking, her voice getting more desperate, more insistent. "Don Destin? Where are they? I need to find them. Have you seen them? Please, please help me find them." One of the passengers started praying. rosary beads clicking. The Our Father recited in a terrified whisper. The bus driver drove faster. Didn't care about speed limits. Didn't care about stops. Just wanted to get somewhere with people and light. When he reached the next major terminal, well lit and busy even at 1 a.m., he looked in the mirror again. The seat was empty. The woman was gone. But the seat was wet, soaked, water dripping onto the floor. He pulled over, refused to drive the rest of the night. The bus company sent someone else to finish the route. And here's the disturbing detail. 3 of the passengers who'd been on that bus called in sick to work the next day. All 3 reported the same nightmare. A woman in white standing over their beds, dripping water onto their faces, whispering, "Heirs tea? Are you mine?" Let's talk about the children La Llorona takes, or allegedly takes, because this is where the legend becomes most practical, most functionally important to the communities where it's told. Throughout Latin America, La Llorona is used as a warning to children. Don't go near the water at night. Don't wander off alone. Don't disobey your parents. Because if you do, La Llorona will find you, and she'll take you. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Children do disappear near water. Drowning is one of the leading causes of accidental death for children worldwide. Water is dangerous, especially at night, especially if you're alone. So the legend serves a practical purpose. It keeps children away from danger. It gives parents a cultural tool for enforcing safety rules. Be home before dark carries more weight when the consequence isn't just punishment from mom and dad, but potential abduction by a grieving ghost. But there are also documented cases where children who disappeared near water and were later found or found dead had details in their accounts that matched the legend in unsettling ways. Child found wandering. Michoacan, 2016. A 6-year-old boy went missing from his family's property near a river in rural Michoacan. Massive search effort. Volunteers, police, dogs. Everyone feared the worst. He was found 3 days later, miles downstream, still alive. Hypothermic, dehydrated, terrified, but alive. When he could finally talk, he told his parents that a woman in white had found him by the river. She'd been crying. She told him she needed help finding her children. Would he help her look? He'd followed her. For how long, he didn't know. Time had gotten strange. It felt like hours, maybe days. She kept leading him along the river, deeper into areas he didn't recognize. She kept asking him his name. He wouldn't tell her. Some instinct, some memory of his grandmother's warnings, told him that if he told her his name, she'd keep him forever. Eventually, he'd gotten away. He couldn't quite explain how. Just that at some point, she'd been distracted, looking at something in the water, and he'd run. The family insists the boy didn't make it up, but he's not imaginative enough to have invented such detailed, consistent story. That something really happened to him during those 3 days. Skeptics say he got lost, hit his head, and hallucinated. But the family knows what they know, and they've put up a small shrine by the river, asking La Llorona to spare their children, to take the offerings instead. The drowned children of El Salvador, various years. El Salvador, along the rivers and coastal areas, has some of the highest rates of child drowning deaths in Central America. Poverty, lack of infrastructure, children left unsupervised while parents work. These are the documented statistical reasons. But ask the families, ask the communities, and many will tell you about La Llorona, about children who went to the river and never came back, about bodies found days later, miles downstream, with strange details that don't quite add up, children found with expressions that suggest they weren't struggling, like they went peacefully, like they followed someone, children whose last words to friends were about hearing a woman crying, children who'd been warned, repeatedly, never to go near the water at night, but went anyway, because they heard someone who needed help, because they thought they could be brave. The rational explanation is always there. Children drown because water is dangerous and children are vulnerable. The legend exists to make sense of senseless tragedy, to give meaning to random loss. But the families who've lost children to the rivers, many of them believe, not metaphorically, not as cultural tradition. They genuinely believe La Llorona took their child, and no amount of statistics or rationalization will convince them otherwise. Now let's talk about protection. Because if La Llorona is real, or if the belief in her is real enough to shape behavior and perception, then people need ways to protect themselves and their children. Different communities have different methods, but some practices appear consistently across regions. Traditional Catholic protection, wearing a cross or religious medal, especially blessed by a priest, carrying rosary beads. Invoking the Virgin Mary, particularly Our Lady of Guadalupe, saying prayers, especially the Our Father or Ave Maria, when you hear the crying. Holy water sprinkled around the home, especially near windows and doors. Blessing children before bed with the sign of the cross. The idea here is that La Llorona, despite her tragedy, is still fundamentally a damned soul or demon, and holy objects provide protection. Indigenous pre-Hispanic protection. Copal incense burned at dusk to purify the air and keep spirits away. Salt scattered at thresholds and windowsills. Salt is purifying in many indigenous traditions. Certain herbs worn or carried. Rue, ruda, particularly effective against evil spirits. Stones from the river placed in protective patterns around property fighting water with water. Offerings left at crossroads or riverbanks to appease wandering spirits. These methods predate Christianity and connect back to older Aztec and Mayan practices for dealing with dangerous supernatural entities. Practical behavioral protection. This is where the legend serves its most obvious function. Don't go near water at night. Period. Don't respond to crying or calls for help near rivers after dark. If you hear La Llorona's cry, go inside immediately and don't look out the window. Keep children inside after sunset if you live near water. Don't say her name at night, especially near water. Some believe this calls her attention. If you must travel near water at night, travel in groups and carry a light. Modern adaptations. Some families play recordings of prayers or religious music near windows at night. Some keep outdoor lights on constantly to make their property uninviting to spirits. Some communities have organized semi-official nighttime patrols to keep children from wandering near waterways. In some Mexican-American neighborhoods, community centers stay open late, specifically to give young people a safe place to be after dark. Do these protections work? Depends on what you mean by work. If La Llorona is a supernatural entity that can be warded off by faith and ritual, then yes, they work for believers. If La Llorona is a cultural narrative that shapes behavior, then they work by keeping children away from actual danger drowning, which is very real regardless of ghosts. Either way, the practical result is the same. Fewer children die in rivers, which was probably the point all along. Let's talk about La Llorona in different regions, because while the core story remains consistent, local variations add fascinating details that reflect specific cultural contexts. Mexico City, central Mexico. This is ground zero for the legend. The most sightings, the most variations, the deepest cultural roots. La Llorona here is often connected to pre-Hispanic goddess worship and colonial trauma. She appears near the ancient canals of Xochimilco, along the Rio Churubusco, in areas where water still flows through a megacity that's mostly paved it over. The Mexico City version tends to emphasize her as a tragic figure, a victim of colonialism and machismo, who became a monster through no fault of her own. There's sympathy for her, even as people fear her. Northern Mexico, U.S. Southwest, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California. Here La Llorona crosses borders. She appears along the Rio Grande, near irrigation canals, in suburban drainage ditches. The Mexican-American communities in these areas have kept the legend alive even as they've adapted to American culture. Interestingly, in these communities, La Llorona sometimes functions as a guardian of cultural identity. Keeping the story alive, telling it to each new generation, is a way of maintaining connection to Mexican heritage. She's a link to the homeland, even for families who've been in the U.S. for generations. The border region version also sometimes incorporates immigration trauma stories of mothers separated from children at the border, of families torn apart, of the grief that comes from forced separation, adding new layers to an old story. Guatemala. The Guatemalan La Llorona has strong Mayan influences mixed with Spanish Catholic elements. She's sometimes associated with ancient Mayan water deities and beliefs about the underworld being accessible through bodies of water. In some Guatemalan communities, she's less about maternal grief and more about ancestral warning. She appears before disasters, before violence, before collective tragedy. The personal story of lost children becomes metaphorical for lost communities, lost cultures. El Salvador. El Salvador's brutal civil war, 1979 to 1992, added new dimensions to the La Llorona legend. Stories emerged of mothers who'd lost children to death squads, to disappearances, to violence. La Llorona became a symbol of that collective grief. Every mother who'd lost a child and never got a body to bury, never got answers, never got justice. The Salvadoran version can be intensely political. She's not just crying for her children. She's crying for all the children, all the disappeared, all the stolen lives. Colombia, Venezuela. In South American versions, La Llorona sometimes merges with or exists alongside similar local legends of weeping women. The story has adapted to local geography, tropical rivers, instead of desert streams, different vegetation, different cultural contexts. The South American versions often emphasize her as a cautionary tale about vanity and selfishness, reflecting different Catholic moral priorities than in Mexico. Spain. Interestingly, there are Spanish legends of weeping women that predate the conquest of the Americas. Some scholars argue that conquistadors brought these stories with them, and they merged with indigenous American legends. The Spanish versions tend to be more explicitly Christian moralistic punishment for sin, warnings about proper behavior, redemption through suffering. This raises an interesting question. Is La Llorona an American legend that traveled to Spain? A Spanish legend that colonized America? Or something older that exists in multiple cultures because the grief of lost children is universal? Probably all of the above. Now let's talk about what happens if you actually encounter La Llorona. Not the general advice, but specific scenarios and how to handle them. Scenario 1. You hear the crying from a distance. You're walking home late. You hear a woman crying somewhere near water. It's distant, but clear. What you do? Stop walking toward the sound. Doesn't matter if your route goes that way. Take a different path, even if it adds 20 minutes to your journey. The sound is a warning, not a request for help. Don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero. Just go somewhere else. If you're with children, pick them up or hold their hands. Move away from the water quickly, but don't run running. It can trigger chase behavior in predatory entities. Get to somewhere with people, with light, with activity. Say a prayer if that's your inclination. Ask for protection from whatever deity or force you believe in. If you're not religious, just focus on getting to safety. Scenario 2. You see her in the distance. You're near water, and you see a figure in white. She's far enough away that you can't make out details, but something about her feels wrong. What you do? Do not approach. Do not call out to her. Do not take photos or videos. Yes, I know. In the modern age, everyone's first instinct is to document, but some things you don't want to draw attention from. Back away slowly while facing her. Keep her in your peripheral vision, but don't make direct eye contact if you can help it. Some traditions say direct eye contact creates a connection she can use to follow you. Get away from the water. Get to somewhere enclosed if possible, inside a building, inside a car, somewhere with boundaries. La Llorona is strongly associated with open spaces near water. Enclosed spaces provide some protection. Scenario 3. She's close, and you can see her clearly. This is the worst case scenario. She's within 20 to 30 feet. You can see details. Maybe she's looking at you. Maybe she's reaching toward you. What you do. This is where all the traditional protections come in. Cross yourself if you're Catholic. Say the Our Father. Invoke protection. The words matter less than the intention and faith behind them. Some accounts say iron provides protection. If you have keys, hold them. If you're near a fence, touch it. Old folk magic says ghosts and spirits have trouble with iron. Don't run unless she moves toward you aggressively. Slow, deliberate movement away from the water, toward human habitation. If she follows, start running. At that point, she's committed to pursuing you, and you need to get away as fast as possible. If you're with children and she grabs for them, fight. Don't worry about seeming crazy or hurting what might be a real person. Better to fight off a real woman and deal with the embarrassment than let La Llorona take a child. Scenario 4. She speaks to you. She asks you a question. Has visto a mis hijos? Heirs T? What you do. Do not engage in conversation. Don't answer questions. Don't give her your name. Don't give her information about yourself or your children. Some traditions say that information creates a bond she can use. If you must speak, some accounts suggest saying, "Que descansen en paz," may they rest in peace, or "Vayan con Dios," go with God, acknowledging her suffering, but not engaging with her questions. Then get away, quickly. Scenario 5. You're in a vehicle. You see her on the road, or she appears in your vehicle, like the bus driver account. What you do. If she's on the road and trying to flag you down, do not stop. I know this goes against every instinct to help someone in distress, but trust the cultural wisdom here. If she's somehow in your vehicle, drive to the nearest populated area. Don't try to force her out. Don't engage. Just get somewhere with witnesses, with lights, with the modern world's concrete reality. Some drivers report that playing religious music or radio helps. The normalcy of it, the connection to the everyday world, seems to weaken her presence. General rules across all scenarios. 1. Don't give her information about yourself or your children. 2. Don't make promises to help her. 3. Get away from water. 4. Get to people, light, enclosed spaces. 5. Use whatever spiritual protection aligns with your beliefs. 6. If you have children with you, that's your only priority, getting them to safety. 7. Don't look back once you start moving away. Let's talk about children who've survived encounters with La Llorona, because these accounts are particularly disturbing and reveal aspects of the legend that don't appear in simple retellings. The changed children. Some children who've been found after encountering La Llorona exhibit strange behavior afterwards. They're withdrawn. They have nightmares. They cry without clear reason. They're afraid of water in ways that seem disproportionate. But more than that, they seem to be listening to something. Parents report their children pausing in the middle of activities, head tilted, as if hearing something no one else can hear. Some children develop an obsession with rivers and canals. Despite their fear, they're drawn to water. They'll wake up in the middle of the night and try to leave the house, heading toward the nearest waterway. Parents have to lock doors and windows to keep them inside. Psychologists would call this trauma response. PTSD from a near-drowning experience or from being lost and terrified. And they're probably right. But the families believe something else, that La Llorona left a mark on these children, that she's still calling to them, that part of them wants to go back to her. Traditional healers, curanderos, are often called in for these cases. They perform limpias, spiritual cleansings, using eggs, herbs, prayers, smoke. The goal is to break whatever connection La Llorona established. Sometimes it works. The child returns to normal over weeks or months. The nightmares fade. The obsession with water disappears. Sometimes it doesn't. And those children, when they grow up, often stay away from water forever. Or they're drawn to it in ways that worry their families. Some become researchers, folklorists, trying to understand what happened to them. Others simply move to landlocked areas and refuse to discuss it. The ones who don't come back, this is the darkest part of the legend. The children who disappear and are never found, or are found dead in circumstances that don't quite make sense. Bodies found miles downstream from where the child was last seen, in places the current shouldn't have carried them. Children who drowned in shallow water, where standing up would have saved them, as if something held them down. Children found with no water in their lungs, dead from hypothermia or shock rather than drowning, suggesting they died before entering the water. Children whose last known activity was heading toward a river or canal, despite having no reason to go there, despite clear instructions to stay away. The authorities investigate these as accidental drownings or, in suspicious cases, as potential crimes. And most of the time, that's probably what they are: tragic accidents or terrible human evil. But some percentage, a small percentage that's probably just statistical noise, have details that match La Llorona encounters. Witnesses who heard a woman crying that night. Other children who reported seeing a woman in white near the water. Families who insist their child knew better, would never have gone near the water willingly. Those are the cases that keep the legend alive. Those are the stories that get told at family gatherings, in hushed voices, when children aren't listening. Because if there's even a small chance the legend is real, if there's even a fraction of truth in it, then the rules matter, the warnings matter, the protections matter. Better to be overcautious, to look foolish, to believe in something that might not exist, than to lose a child because you are too rational to take precautions. Now let's talk about La Llorona's relationship with mothers, because this is psychologically complex and culturally loaded in ways that deserve unpacking. La Llorona exists in cultures with very specific ideas about motherhood. Latin American culture, shaped by Catholicism and machismo, places enormous weight on mothers. The mother is sacred, self-sacrificing, endlessly patient, the emotional center of the family, the moral compass, the one who keeps everything together. This is, of course, an impossible standard. No real person can live up to it, but the cultural expectation remains. And La Llorona represents what happens when mothers fail to meet that standard, when they prioritize their own desires, when they make mistakes, when they crack under pressure. She's a warning. This is what happens when you're not a good enough mother. Your children die, and you're damned forever. It's incredibly punitive, and it's incredibly effective at keeping women in line, at enforcing behavioral norms, and maintaining social structures. But there's another layer to this, because many women, many mothers, see themselves in La Llorona. They understand her grief. They recognize the impossible position she was in, abandoned by the man she loved, left alone with children in a society that offers no support to single mothers, pushed to desperation by circumstances she didn't create. There's sympathy for her, even identification with her. Some feminist scholars and artists have reclaimed La Llorona as a symbol of female rage and grief in patriarchal societies. She's not a cautionary tale about mothers. She's a manifestation of what society does to women, uses them, abandons them, blames them for the consequences. In this reading, La Llorona's grief isn't just about her children. It's about all women who've been used and discarded, all mothers who've been left to raise children alone without support, all the ways that Latin American culture, and cultures everywhere, venerate motherhood in the abstract while providing no concrete help to actual mothers. Her crying becomes not just personal grief, but political protest, a howl of rage at systems that created her tragedy. This reinterpretation doesn't erase the scary ghost story, but it adds depth. It makes La Llorona more than just a monster. She's a victim who became a monster. And that's somehow more tragic and more terrifying. Modern mothers in Latin American communities often have complicated relationships with the legend. They use it to keep their children safe. Don't go near the river, or La Llorona will get you. But they also relate to her grief. They understand what it's like to be judged, to feel like you're never good enough, to carry guilt that isn't entirely your fault. Some mothers leave offerings for La Llorona. Small tokens at riverbanks or canals, flowers, candles, photos of their own children, asking for protection. The offering says, "I understand your grief. I honor your loss. Please don't take my children to replace yours." It's a recognition of shared experience, mother to mother, across the barrier of life and death. Let's talk about La Llorona's connection to water in more detail, because water is absolutely central to this legend, and the symbolism runs deep. In many cultures, water represents birth, amniotic fluid, emergence into life, death, drowning, the underworld, purification, baptism, ritual cleansing, boundaries between worlds, rivers as borders, thresholds, memory and forgetting, rivers of Lethe, emotion and the unconscious, depth, hidden things. All of these meanings layer into La Llorona's story. She killed her children in water. She searches for them in water. She appears near water. She takes new victims into water. Water is her element, her prison, her hunting ground, her grave. The specific type of water matters too. She's not typically associated with oceans or lakes too big, too impersonal. She appears near rivers, canals, streams. Water that flows, that moves, that's going somewhere. Water that can carry things away. This makes sense symbolically. Rivers represent time, progression, the irreversible flow of life toward death. Once something enters a river, it moves downstream. It doesn't come back. You can't step in the same river twice. La Llorona's children drowned. They were carried away, and she spent centuries trying to retrieve them, trying to reverse what can't be reversed, trying to step back into the river and find what was lost. It's futile, tragic, endless. The water also represents her tears. She's the weeping woman. Her grief is so immense, it's become environmental. It's not just that she cries near water. She is the water. Her tears have become rivers. Every canal is her sorrow made physical. There's also a baptismal element. In Catholic tradition, baptism washes away original sin. It's death and rebirth. The old self dies in the water. The new self emerges purified. La Llorona's drowning of her children could be read as a horrifically twisted baptism. She's trying to save them, or damn them, or transform them. The water that should purify becomes the water that destroys. And her own death by drowning? It's a baptism that failed. She went into the water expecting death, maybe expecting peace, maybe expecting to join her children. But she didn't find peace. She didn't find her children. She just found more searching, more grief, more crying. The water that should have transformed her just trapped her. In some indigenous American traditions, water is a boundary between the living world and the world of the dead. Rivers are liminal spaces. Standing at a riverbank, you're between worlds, and spirits can cross more easily there. La Llorona exists in that liminal space. She's not fully alive, not fully dead, not fully human, not fully spirit. She's trapped in the in-between. And water is where that in-between is most accessible. That's why she can appear to the living. That's why she can touch them, grab them, try to pull them into her world. Because at the riverbank, at the canal's edge, the boundary is thin enough to cross. For children, water represents both play and danger. It's fun, it's refreshing, it's a place to explore. But it's also where children die. Drowning is silent, quick, a child can be underwater, dying, just a few feet away from adults who don't realize anything's wrong. So La Llorona, appearing near water, calls to children in both ways. She's the danger they're warned about. But she's also compelling, mysterious. She makes the danger personal, gives it a face and a story, makes it something children can understand and fear in ways that abstract warnings about water safety never quite achieve. Let's talk about La Llorona in popular culture, because like any powerful legend, she's been adapted, commercialized, and reinterpreted countless times. Some of these interpretations are respectful. Many are not. Films. The most notable recent film is The Curse of La Llorona, 2019, part of the Conjuring Universe franchise. It takes the legend and Americanizes it. The ghost terrorizes a white American family in 1970s Los Angeles. The film was commercially successful, but criticized by many in the Latin American community for stripping away the cultural context. La Llorona becomes just another jump scare ghost, divorced from the colonial trauma and maternal grief that make the original legend meaningful. There are dozens of Mexican films about La Llorona, ranging from serious dramas to low-budget horror. Some treat the legend with respect and explore its cultural significance. Others are pure exploitation. A 2019 Guatemalan film, also called La Llorona, takes a completely different approach. It's a political drama about Guatemala's genocide of indigenous people, with La Llorona appearing as a manifestation of justice and historical memory. This one was critically acclaimed and treated the legend as the serious cultural artifact it is. Television. La Llorona has appeared in episodes of Supernatural, American, somewhat respectful, Grim, American, problematic, various telenovelas, Mexican, Latin American, mixed quality, documentary series about paranormal activity, exploitative. The quality varies wildly. Some shows do research and consult with Latin American cultural experts. Others just use La Llorona as a scary brown lady for a Halloween episode. Literature. There are countless children's books about La Llorona, mostly published in Spanish for Latin American and Latino markets. These often present her as a cautionary tale. Behave. Listen to your parents. Don't wander off. Literary fiction has also engaged with the legend. Mexican and Chicano writers have used La Llorona as a metaphor for various themes: colonialism, immigration, loss of cultural identity, maternal trauma, the immigrant experience. Some of the best literary interpretations treat her as a tragic figure worth serious consideration, not just a scary story. Music. There are traditional songs about La Llorona throughout Mexico and Central America. Some are haunting ballads. Some are warnings set to music. Some are surprisingly beautiful, honoring her grief rather than just her horror. Modern musicians, particularly in the Mexican-American community, have written songs that reference La Llorona, using her as a symbol of various experiences: love and loss, cultural heritage, the pain of separation. Visual art. La Llorona has been depicted by countless artists. Some traditional Day of the Dead imagery includes her. Modern Chicano artists have created powerful images of her that emphasize her humanity and suffering. Some of the most moving artistic interpretations show her face not as a monster, but as a grieving mother. Beautiful and terrible at once. The problem with commercialization. When legends like La Llorona get absorbed into mainstream horror culture, they often lose what makes them meaningful. They become generic, scary ghosts. The cultural specificity disappears. The historical trauma gets erased. The complexity is flattened into jump scares and special effects. This is particularly problematic when the commercialization is done by people outside the culture. When American studios make La Llorona movies without hiring Latin American writers or consultants. When the legend gets treated as public domain content to be exploited for profit, rather than as a living cultural tradition that belongs to specific communities. It's a form of cultural appropriation, taking something meaningful, stripping away its meaning, and selling it. That said, not all popular culture engagement with La Llorona is problematic. When Latin American creators tell La Llorona stories, when they bring their own cultural understanding and family histories to the narrative, the results can be powerful. The legend is strong enough to survive commercialization. It existed before Hollywood and will exist after, but it's worth being critical about who gets to tell these stories and how they're told. Now, let's talk about the academic study of La Llorona, because folklorists and anthropologists have been analyzing this legend for decades, and their findings add important context. The colonial trauma thesis. Many scholars argue that La Llorona is fundamentally about the trauma of colonization. The Spanish conquest destroyed indigenous civilizations. Mixed-race children, mestizos, were born from relationships that were often coercive or violent. These children occupied an impossible social position, too indigenous for Spanish society, too Spanish for indigenous communities. In this reading, La Llorona represents indigenous Mexico, weeping for her lost children, the pre-conquest culture, the murdered indigenous people, the destroyed way of life. The Spanish man who abandoned her represents the colonial power that used indigenous resources, including indigenous women's bodies, and then discarded them. The mestizo children she drowns represent the new hybrid culture that couldn't survive the violence of its creation. It's a dark reading, but it makes the legend about collective trauma rather than individual moral failing. The gender control thesis. Other scholars focus on La Llorona as a tool of patriarchal control. The legend enforces behavioral norms for women. Be chaste, be devoted to your children above all else. Accept male abandonment without complaint. Don't prioritize your own needs or desires. The horror of La Llorona isn't just that she killed her children. It's that she dared to express rage at her abandonment. She acted out. She refused to suffer silently. And for that, she's damned forever. The legend teaches women, your suffering should be quiet. Maternal grief is acceptable. Rage at male betrayal is not. The water death thesis. Some anthropologists connect La Llorona to practical explanations for child deaths. Before modern infrastructure, rivers and canals were daily hazards. Children drowned regularly. The legend emerges as a way to explain random tragedy. It wasn't just bad luck. It was La Llorona. Create enforceable behavior rules. Don't go near water. Process collective grief. The community's lost children become La Llorona's lost children. In this view, the legend is adaptive. It serves a practical function in keeping children alive by making water danger emotionally resonant and personally immediate. A goddess transformation thesis. We discussed this earlier, but it's worth expanding. Scholars who study pre-Hispanic religion argue that La Llorona is what happened when Spanish Catholicism encountered Aztec goddess worship, Cihuacotl, and other female deities associated with motherhood, death, and water were too powerful, too important to completely erase, so they were transformed, made into cautionary tales, stripped of their divinity, but allowed to persist as ghosts and demons. La Llorona preserves the memory of these goddesses, even in diminished form. She's a link to pre-conquest spirituality that survived by going underground, by disguising itself as Christian moral teaching. The psychoanalytic reading. Some scholars apply Freudian or Jungian frameworks. La Llorona represents the devouring mother archetype, anxiety about maternal ambivalence. All mothers sometimes resent their children. Fear of female sexuality, uncontrolled by patriarchal structures. The return of the repressed, what society denies, comes back as horror. These readings can be interesting, but often feel reductive. They treat La Llorona as a universal symbol rather than a culturally specific narrative. The living folklore thesis. The most recent scholarship emphasizes that La Llorona isn't a static legend. She's living folklore. She changes, adapts, responds to contemporary concerns. Immigration creates new La Llorona stories. Environmental destruction of waterways adds new meaning. Modern family structures transform the narrative. Urban development changes where she appears. The legend is alive because it remains relevant. It continues to speak to real concerns and real fears in Latin American and Latino communities. Let's talk about what La Llorona actually wants. Because different versions of the legend give different answers to this fundamental question. Does she want her children back? The simplest reading. She's searching for the specific children she lost. She's been searching for 500 years. She will search forever. Every child she sees might be one of hers. She can't accept their death. She can't move on. This makes her tragic, but also dangerous. Because in her delusion, she'll take any child, trying to fill the void that can't be filled. Does she want to replace her children? A darker reading. She knows her children are dead, but she wants new children. She wants to fill the emptiness. She's trying to rebuild what she lost by taking other people's children. This makes her more consciously predatory, less sympathetic, a kidnapper rather than a confused ghost. Does she want company in her grief? Another interpretation. She doesn't want the children for herself. She wants to create more mothers like her. More women who know the specific agony of losing a child to water. She's spreading her suffering because suffering shared is suffering validated. Misery loves company, taken to supernatural extremes. Does she want revenge? Some versions suggest she's not actually looking for children at all. She's looking for the man who abandoned her, but he's long dead. So she takes her rage out on whoever's available. Children suffer because men's sins are visited on the innocent. In this reading, every child she drowns is a substitute for the revenge she never got. Does she want forgiveness? Perhaps she's trapped in her cycle of searching and crying because she can't forgive herself. She's damned by her own guilt. If someone could absolve her, release her from her self-imposed punishment, she could rest. But no one can, because what she did was unforgivable. So she's caught forever in the moment of realization, what have I done? Unable to move forward or back. Does she want to die? Maybe what she's really looking for is an end to her existence. She's been dead, but not gone for centuries. She wants true death, true peace. She searches because searching is all she knows how to do, but what she really wants is to stop existing. The children she takes, maybe she's trying to create enough tragedy that someone will finally figure out how to destroy her permanently. Does she know what she wants? Or maybe, most tragically, she doesn't even remember anymore what she's looking for. The centuries have eroded her purpose. She knows she lost something. She knows she's supposed to be searching. She knows she's supposed to be crying. But she's forgotten why. She's forgotten who she was. She's just a loop of grief and searching, divorced from original meaning, continuing out of supernatural inertia. This last interpretation is somehow the most horrifying, because it means even she doesn't understand her own story anymore. She's become purely instinct, purely pattern, purely a ghost in every sense, an echo of something that once had meaning but is now just noise. The truth is probably that La Llorona wants different things depending on who's telling the story and what lesson they're trying to teach. She's a flexible narrative. She adapts to fit the needs of each teller, each listener, each generation. And that flexibility is part of why she survived. She means what you need her to mean. Now let's talk about people who claim to communicate with La Llorona. Not just encounter her, but actually interact with her in meaningful ways. Spiritualists and mediums. In Mexico and throughout Latin America, there are practitioners who claim to commune with spirits, including La Llorona. Some say they've helped her find peace. Others say they've received messages from her. Others claim to channel her during seances or spiritual sessions. These practitioners often present La Llorona as less threatening than the legend suggests. They say she's in pain, confused, desperate for help, that she doesn't want to hurt anyone, that she's been misunderstood. Skeptics obviously dismiss these claims. But in communities where spiritual communication is taken seriously, these practitioners provide a service. They offer a way to engage with the legend that's less about fear and more about compassion. Curanderos, traditional healers. Curanderos who deal with spiritual ailments sometimes perform rituals specifically for people who've been affected by La Llorona. Whether that means people who've encountered her, children who won't stop having nightmares about her, or families who feel cursed by her presence. These healers often have specific prayers, herbs, and rituals designed to break La Llorona's influence. Some curanderos claim they've actually negotiated with her spirit, offering her something she needs in exchange for leaving a family alone. What could you possibly offer a ghost that's been wandering for 500 years? According to these healers, acknowledgement of her pain, prayers for her children's souls, offerings left at water where she appears, promises to tell her story correctly and completely. In essence, you offer her respect and recognition. You treat her as a person, not just a monster. Researchers and folklorists. Some academics have spent years studying La Llorona, collecting accounts, interviewing witnesses, documenting variations. A few have become personally invested to the point where they claim to feel connected to her. One Mexican anthropologist, in a paper published in the 1990s, described spending nights by rivers and canals, calling out to La Llorona, inviting her to appear, promising to listen to her story without judgment. He claimed that on his 7th night of this practice, he heard her crying. Not in his ears, he said, but in his mind. And he felt overwhelming sadness, not his sadness, but hers. Borrowed grief. Transmitted grief. He wrote that he understood, in that moment, that La Llorona isn't cruel. She's broken. And every child she takes, she believes she's saving. She's bringing them home. She's being the mother she failed to be the first time. It doesn't make her less dangerous, but it makes her more tragic. The offerings. Throughout Mexico and Central America, you can find small shrines near waterways. Candles, flowers, photos, small toys. These aren't official Catholic shrines. They're folk offerings to La Llorona. Some people leave these offerings asking for protection. Don't take my children. Others leave them in sympathy. I understand your pain. Still others leave them in negotiation. Here is something for you. Please leave us alone. Do these offerings work? Statistically, probably not. But the people who leave them believe. And belief, in matters of folklore and fear, is a powerful thing. There are stories of families who left offerings and afterwards felt the oppressive presence around their home lift. Of children who stopped having nightmares. Of communities where drowning incidents decreased after a proper shrine was established. Coincidence? Psychological relief creating behavioral changes? Or genuine supernatural effect? Pick whichever explanation lets you sleep at night. Let's talk about La Llorona and children's perception, because kids often experience the legend differently than adults. To children, she's real. Ask most Mexican or Central American children if La Llorona is real, and they'll say yes, without hesitation, because they've been told the stories by people they trust: grandmothers, parents, older siblings. And in children's worldview, if the adults you trust say something is real, it's real. This isn't the same as believing in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. Those are fun, temporary beliefs. La Llorona is serious. Adults tell La Llorona stories with genuine concern, genuine fear in their voices. Children pick up on that. The fear is useful. From a purely practical standpoint, children's fear of La Llorona keeps them safe. They won't wander near rivers at night. They'll come home when called. They'll listen to safety rules. Is it psychological manipulation? Yes. Does it work? Also yes. Some parents feel guilty about using La Llorona to scare their children into compliance. Others see it as no different than teaching kids about stranger danger or looking both ways before crossing the street. The threat is real. Water danger, getting lost, actual human predators. And La Llorona is just a culturally specific way of communicating that threat. When fear becomes trauma, but there's a line where useful caution becomes harmful anxiety. Some children become so terrified of La Llorona that they can't function normally. They can't sleep. They panic during baths. They refuse to go outside after dark, even in completely safe situations. These children aren't just being cautious. They're traumatized. And the trauma can persist into adulthood. There are adults who trace their anxiety disorders, their fear of water, their nightmares, directly back to La Llorona stories they heard as children. Stories that were meant to protect, but instead damaged. This raises ethical questions about using fear as a parenting tool. But it also reflects a larger truth. Legends like La Llorona have real psychological power. They're not just entertaining stories. They shape how people see the world, how they assess danger, how they experience fear. Children who report seeing her. Periodically, children claim to have seen or heard La Llorona. Are they lying? Mistaken? Experiencing genuine paranormal encounters? Impossible to say definitively. What's interesting is that children's descriptions often include details they shouldn't know. A 4-year-old who describes a woman in white with wet hair crying by the river, when they've never been told the specific details of the legend, just the name and basic warning. Skeptics say the child overheard more than the parents realized, or saw a reference on TV, or absorbed details from cultural osmosis. Believers say children are more sensitive to supernatural presence, that they see things adults have trained themselves not to see. Either way, when a child reports seeing La Llorona, families take it seriously. Protections are put in place. Priests might be called. Curanderos might perform cleansings. Because even if you're 99% sure the child imagined it, that 1% possibility is too dangerous to ignore. Teenagers and La Llorona. Teenagers often go through a phase of testing the legend. Groups of friends will dare each other to go to known La Llorona locations at night, to call out to her, to see if she appears. This is standard teenage behavior testing boundaries, proving courage, rebelling against parental warnings. But it's also dangerous because teenagers aren't actually as invincible as they think they are, and rivers at night are genuinely hazardous. Every few years, there are news stories about teenagers drowning after going to rivers at night to look for La Llorona. The exact circumstances vary, but the pattern is consistent. Young people treating a serious warning as a game until something goes wrong. These deaths reinforce the legend. See, La Llorona is real. She got those kids who didn't respect her. From a rational perspective, the teenagers died because they were drunk, or it was dark, or they didn't know how to swim, or they underestimated the current. La Llorona had nothing to do with it, but try telling that to the community. Try telling that to the families. The legend persists because it explains tragedy in ways that random accident doesn't. Now let's talk about La Llorona and immigration, because this aspect of the legend has become increasingly relevant in recent decades. Border crossings. The U.S.-Mexico border region has developed its own La Llorona variations. Stories of her appearing along the Rio Grande, where so many migrants have drowned attempting to cross. In these stories, La Llorona is sometimes seen as a warning. Don't cross. The journey is too dangerous. You'll lose everything, including your children. Other times, she's seen as a guardian, a spirit who guides lost migrants to safety, who protects children making the journey, who mourns those who don't survive. The legend adapts to reflect contemporary trauma. Modern border crossings echo the original story's themes. Desperation, impossible choices, children at risk, families torn apart. Separated families. When the U.S. government implemented family separation policies at the border, some activists and artists drew explicit connections to La Llorona. Mothers having their children taken away, not knowing where they are, unable to retrieve them. The anguish of forced separation. La Llorona became a symbol of that specific horror. protests featured images of her. Artists created installations connecting her legend to immigration policy. This is the legend functioning as political commentary. La Llorona represents not just one mother's grief, but all mothers' grief. All children lost to systems and policies and circumstances beyond individual control. The diaspora legend. As Mexican and Central American communities have spread throughout the United States and beyond, La Llorona has traveled with them. She appears in places that had never heard of her 50 years ago. Suburban neighborhoods in California, Texas, Arizona, Illinois. Anywhere there's a significant Latino population, there are La Llorona sightings. She adapts to new geographies. She appears near artificial lakes, neighborhood ponds, even swimming pools. The legend is a way of maintaining cultural identity in diaspora. Teaching children about La Llorona is teaching them where they come from. It's a thread connecting them to ancestral homelands, to family histories, to traditions that predate their current circumstances. For immigrant families, La Llorona serves multiple functions. Practical safety lessons, don't wander off, stay close to family. Cultural continuity, this is part of who we are. And emotional processing, grief and displacement, and the pain of being far from home. Citizenship and belonging. There's something poignant about La Llorona existing in immigrant communities. She's a ghost who can't go home, who's searching for something she lost, who exists in a liminal space, not fully here or there, belonging nowhere. That resonates with immigrant experiences, particularly first-generation immigrants who often feel caught between cultures. Not fully Mexican, Salvadoran, Guatemalan anymore, but not fully American either. La Llorona becomes a metaphor for that displacement, for the grief of leaving home, for the impossibility of return, for searching for belonging that always seems just out of reach. She's not just a scary story, she's a mirror. Let's talk about La Llorona and feminism, because her story raises complex questions about gender, power, and agency. The victim interpretation. One feminist reading emphasizes La Llorona as victim. A woman abandoned by a man who had all the social and economic power. A single mother in a society with no support systems. A person pushed to desperation by circumstances she didn't create. Her crime was responding to betrayal and impossible circumstances in the only way she could imagine. In this reading, La Llorona's damnation is unjust. She's punished for failing to be a perfect mother under impossible conditions, while the man who abandoned her faces no consequences. The legend becomes a cautionary tale about how patriarchal societies punish women for circumstances created by men's actions. The perpetrator problem. But there's no escaping the fact that in most versions, La Llorona killed her children, or through neglect, allowed them to die. That's not metaphorical. That's not symbolic. She committed an act of horrific violence against innocent children. Some feminists struggle with reclaiming La Llorona because of this. Yes, she was a victim, but she also created more victims. Can both things be true? Can we acknowledge her suffering without excusing her actions? This mirrors real-world discussions about cycles of abuse, about trauma creating traumatized people who traumatize others, about where accountability lies when someone has been victimized and then victimizes others. The Angry Woman. Another feminist reading focuses on La Llorona's rage. She's one of the few legendary female figures who's allowed to be angry. Not sad, not passive, angry, destructively, violently angry. Most cultural narratives about women, especially in traditional Catholic Latin American culture, require women to be gentle, forgiving, long-suffering. La Llorona is none of those things. She's rage embodied. She's what happens when women's anger, which society constantly tells them to suppress, finally explodes. Is her rage destructive? Yes. Is it misdirected? Absolutely. She should be angry at the man who abandoned her, not at her innocent children. But maybe the point is that anger, when suppressed long enough, when given no legitimate outlet, becomes indiscriminate. becomes monstrous. The agency question. Some scholars ask, does La Llorona have agency in her own story? In most versions, she's reactive. The man leaves her. She reacts by killing the children. She realizes what she's done and reacts by killing herself. Even in death, she's reacting, searching, crying, taking children in response to her loss. Where is her moment of choice? Where does she decide something rather than just responding? This lack of agency reflects how women are often portrayed in traditional narratives, acted upon rather than acting, responding to male decisions rather than making their own. But some retellings try to restore her agency. In these versions, she makes a deliberate choice. Maybe she kills the children not in rage, but in mercy better. They die than grow up in a world that will treat them as she's been treated. Maybe her searching isn't confusion, but determination. She has a goal, and she's pursuing it with single-minded purpose. These retellings try to make her a tragic hero, rather than a tragic victim. Modern feminist art. Contemporary Chicana and Latina artists have created powerful works engaging with La Llorona. These aren't simple retellings. They're reinterpretations that center her humanity, her complexity, her righteous anger. Some artists portray her face not as monstrous, but as beautiful and heartbroken. Some show her pregnant, emphasizing the bodily reality of motherhood that the legend often glosses over. Some show her surrounded by other women, a community of sufferers, a collective rather than an isolated figure. These artistic interventions don't erase her horror, but they complicate it. They refuse to let her be only a monster or only a victim. They insist she's both, and that contradiction is the point. The challenge with feminist readings of La Llorona is that the legend is deeply embedded in patriarchal culture. It was created, shaped, and transmitted by societies with rigid gender roles and punitive attitudes toward women who transgressed. You can reinterpret it, you can reclaim it, but you can't completely separate it from that origin. The patriarchal assumptions are in the DNA of the story. Maybe the best feminist engagement with La Llorona acknowledges that, uses her story to talk about how culture controls women through fear, through impossible standards, through the constant threat of being labeled a bad mother. She's a warning created by patriarchy, but she can be read against patriarchy, used to illuminate the very systems that created her. Let's talk about La Llorona and mental illness, because her story intersects with questions about psychology, madness, and how societies understand and respond to mental health crises. Postpartum depression and psychosis. From a modern psychological perspective, La Llorona's story contains recognizable elements of severe postpartum mental illness. Postpartum depression affects up to 15% of new mothers. Postpartum psychosis, much rarer but much more severe, affects about 0.1 to 0.2%. Symptoms of postpartum psychosis can include delusions, hallucinations, severe mood swings, thoughts of harming oneself or the baby, disconnection from reality. Women experiencing postpartum psychosis can become genuinely dangerous to themselves and their children, not through malice, but through disordered thinking. In a society without understanding of mental illness, without treatment options, without support systems, a woman suffering from postpartum psychosis would appear possessed, cursed, or evil. Her actions would seem incomprehensible. The La Llorona legend might originate partly from real incidents of women with untreated postpartum mental illness who harmed their children. The legend then serves as an explanation for something terrifying and incomprehensible. Why would a mother kill her children? Answer: because she was cursed. Because she was wicked. Because she broke taboos. Not because she was sick and needed help. Grief and complicated mourning. La Llorona's eternal searching. Her inability to accept her children's death. Her repetitive behavior. These mirror patterns seen in complicated grief or prolonged grief disorder. Most people who lose loved ones eventually process the grief and move forward. But some get stuck. They can't accept the loss. They can't imagine a future without the person they've lost. They become trapped in the moment of loss, unable to move past it. La Llorona is trapped in her grief, literally, supernaturally trapped, but also psychologically trapped in a way that's all too human. The difference is that most grieving people don't become dangerous. They suffer internally. La Llorona externalizes her suffering, making others share her pain. Trauma responses. From a trauma psychology perspective, La Llorona exhibits symptoms of severe PTSD, intrusive memories, constantly reliving the loss, hypervigilance, always searching, inability to feel positive emotions, dissociation from reality, mistaking other children for her own. Her wandering, her crying, her searching, these could be read as a trauma response frozen in time. She's stuck in the traumatic moment, unable to process it, unable to heal, unable to move on. This reading makes her sympathetic. She's not evil. She's profoundly damaged. Her actions come from a place of psychological injury, not moral failing. But it doesn't make her less dangerous. Damaged people can still cause harm. Trauma doesn't excuse causing more trauma. Cultural attitudes toward mental illness. The Dia La Llorona legend reflects cultural attitudes toward mental illness that persist in many Latin American communities. Mental illness is often understood through spiritual frameworks, possession, curses, bad spirits, rather than medical ones. This has benefits and drawbacks. On one hand, spiritual frameworks provide culturally resonant explanations and interventions. On the other hand, they can prevent people from seeking medical treatment that might actually help. A woman showing signs of postpartum depression might be taken to a curandero for a limpia, spiritual cleansing, rather than to a psychiatrist for medication and therapy. Sometimes traditional healing helps. Sometimes it's not enough. The legend also reinforces stigma around maternal mental health. The message of La Llorona is, bad mothers lose their children. If you're struggling with motherhood, if you're not bonding with your baby, if you're having dark thoughts, that's shameful. That's dangerous. That's something to hide, not something to get help for. This stigma prevents women from seeking help when they need it, which can lead to tragedies, which then feed back into the legend. It's a vicious cycle. Modern mental health. Increasingly, mental health professionals in Latin American and Latino communities are finding ways to engage with cultural beliefs like La Llorona, while also providing evidence-based treatment. Some therapists use the legend as a conversation starter. You know how La Llorona was so overwhelmed she couldn't see a way forward? That's what depression can do. But unlike her, you can get help. You're not cursed. You're sick. And we can treat sickness. This approach respects cultural frameworks while introducing medical concepts. It meets people where they are. Others use La Llorona as a metaphor in therapy. What are you grieving? What are you searching for? What would it take for you to rest? The legend, reframed, becomes a tool for processing grief and trauma rather than just a scary story. Let's talk about what La Llorona teaches us. Assuming legends can teach anything. Assuming old stories still matter in a world of smartphones and streaming video. Lesson 1. Water is dangerous. The most obvious, practical lesson: respect water. Don't underestimate rivers, canals, oceans. Don't let children play near water unsupervised. Don't assume you're a strong enough swimmer to handle unexpected currents. This lesson has saved lives, will continue to save lives. La Llorona might be a metaphor, but drowning is brutally literal. Lesson 2. Abandonment has consequences. The man who abandoned La Llorona thought he could walk away cleanly, start a new life, marry someone more suitable. His actions would have no consequences for him, but his abandonment destroyed La Llorona, led to the deaths of his children, created a monster that has haunted his country for 500 years. The lesson: your actions affect others. You can't just abandon people and expect no consequences. What you do ripples outward, affecting people in ways you can't predict or control. This applies to personal relationships, yes, but also to larger social patterns. When societies abandon certain groups, indigenous people, single mothers, immigrants, the poor, there are consequences. Trauma compounds, damage spreads, monsters are created. La Llorona is the ghost of abandoned people, and she's still here. Lesson 3. Grief transformed. Grief that has no outlet becomes something else, something destructive. La Llorona couldn't process her loss in healthy ways. She had no support, no therapy, no community to hold her, no legitimate avenue for her rage and pain. So her grief transformed into something monstrous. The lesson: we need to give people, especially women, especially mothers, permission and space to grieve, to rage, to struggle, to be imperfect, to need help. When we demand that grief be silent and private, when we shame people for struggling, we create conditions for that grief to metastasize into something worse. Lesson 4. The past doesn't die. La Llorona is 500 years old in most interpretations. That's how long she's been wandering. That's how long this story has persisted. The lesson: historical trauma doesn't just disappear. Colonial violence, generational poverty, systemic oppression, these things leave scars. They create patterns that persist across centuries. You can't just say, that was a long time ago, get over it, because the past is still here, still crying, still searching, still causing harm. La Llorona is history that refuses to be forgotten. And maybe that's important. Maybe some things shouldn't be forgotten. Lesson 5. Love can become dangerous. La Llorona loved her children. That's never in dispute. Even versions where she kills them in rage, she loved them. The love wasn't enough to prevent tragedy. In some versions, the love itself became the vehicle for tragedy. The lesson: love doesn't conquer all. Love can become possessive, obsessive, destructive. Maternal love, so idealized in Latin American culture, can become smothering, can become demanding, can become dangerous. This doesn't mean love is bad. It means love needs boundaries, balance, awareness. It means loving someone doesn't give you ownership over them. La Llorona wanted to keep her children forever, and in the most literal way possible, she did. She drowned them so they'd always be with her in death. That's love transformed into possession, into violence. Lesson 6. Some lines shouldn't be crossed. The core taboo of the legend: don't harm your children, no matter what, no matter how desperate you are, no matter how betrayed you feel, no matter what. There are lines that, once crossed, you can't uncross. Actions that can't be undone. Choices that damn you. This is a conservative, traditional lesson, and it serves traditional power structures. Women should sacrifice everything for their children, should accept any suffering, should never prioritize their own needs. But there's also something essential here. Some actions have permanent consequences. Some choices you can't take back. La Llorona lives in that space of irrevocable action. She's the embodiment of, I can't take it back, and she exists in that space forever. Lesson 7. Empathy across death. Despite her horror, La Llorona generates sympathy. People leave offerings for her, pray for her, try to ease her suffering, even though she's dangerous. The lesson: even monsters deserve empathy. Even people who've done terrible things are still people. Even the damned are suffering. This doesn't mean excusing her actions. It means recognizing her humanity, even in her monstrosity. And maybe that's important. Maybe that recognition that anyone, under the right circumstances, could become something terrible, keeps us humble, keeps us aware of our own capacity for harm. La Llorona isn't alien. She's frighteningly human. And that's the scariest part. Now let's talk about the future of La Llorona, because legends don't just preserve the past, they evolve with us into the future. Climate change and water. As climate change alters waterways, droughts drying up rivers, floods creating new channels, pollution destroying ecosystems, La Llorona's territory is changing. Some new stories reflect this. La Llorona appearing in dried riverbeds, crying not for her children, but for the water itself. La Llorona in polluted canals, her white dress stained with industrial runoff, mourning environmental destruction. The legend adapts to new anxieties. She becomes not just about personal tragedy, but about collective loss, about what we've destroyed, about what we can't get back. Digital age. Interestingly, La Llorona has thrived in the digital age. Social media is full of La Llorona content. TikTok videos, Instagram posts, YouTube documentaries, Twitter threads. Young people, especially young Latinos, engage with the legend in new ways. They create memes. They make jokes. But they also share serious accounts, discuss the legend's meaning, debate its relevance. The legend spreads through digital networks faster than it ever could through oral tradition alone. It reaches people who've never lived near rivers, who've never heard the story from their grandmothers, but who encounter it online and find it compelling. Intersectional interpretations. Modern retellings increasingly engage with intersectional analysis. How La Llorona's story intersects with race, class, gender, sexuality, immigration status. Queer retellings imagine La Llorona as a lesbian whose children were taken away because her relationship was deemed inappropriate. Indigenous interpretations emphasize her as a colonized woman, making her specifically about racial violence and cultural erasure. Class-conscious versions focus on her poverty, on how economic desperation contributed to her tragedy. These aren't just academic exercises. They're ways of keeping the legend alive and relevant by connecting it to contemporary social justice concerns. New media. La Llorona appears in video games, virtual reality experiences, augmented reality apps. Imagine a horror game where you navigate a dark forest, hearing her cry from your speakers, trying to find your way out before she finds you. Or an AR, app that overlays her image on real waterways when you point your phone camera at them, creating a blend of legend and reality. Technology creates new ways to experience old stories, and La Llorona, being fundamentally about presence and absence, about what you can sense but can't quite see, is perfect for these immersive media. Continued sightings. Despite modernity, despite rational explanations, people continue to report encountering La Llorona. Every year, new stories, new witnesses, new claims. Some of these are probably hoaxes. Some are misidentifications. Some are people primed by the legend, seeing what they expect to see. But some are genuinely inexplicable, and those keep the legend vital. Keep it feeling real rather than historical. As long as people are encountering her, or believe they are, La Llorona will remain a living legend rather than a museum piece. The next 500 years. Will La Llorona exist 500 years from now? Hard to say. Legends come and go. What seems eternal can fade. But La Llorona has shown remarkable persistence. She survived colonization, modernization, urbanization, digital transformation. She's adapted to each new context while retaining her core. As long as there's water, grief, mothers, children, abandonment, colonialism's legacy, and human capacity for both love and violence, La Llorona will probably have something to say. She's not going anywhere. She's still searching, still crying, still walking the riverbanks between past and present, death and life, legend and reality. So what's the final word on La Llorona? Is she real? The answer depends on what you mean by real. Is there a literal ghost woman who drowned her children 500 years ago and still wanders near waterways, taking other children? Probably not. Almost certainly not. The rational, skeptical part of us knows this. But is La Llorona real in the sense that she shapes behavior, creates fear, influences culture, explains tragedy, processes trauma, and maintains cultural continuity? Absolutely. Unquestionably, she's as real as any cultural narrative can be. She's real because people believe in her, because they structure their lives around avoiding her, because they tell their children about her, because they leave offerings for her, because they see her or think they do, and that perception shapes their reality. She's real because the things she represents are real. Colonial trauma, maternal grief, abandonment, water danger, impossible choices, love that becomes violence. She's real because her story, after 500 years, still resonates, still frightens, still teaches, still matters. You don't have to believe in literal ghosts to believe in La Llorona. You just have to recognize that stories have power, that culture shapes perception, that legends can be true even if they're not factual. And maybe that's enough. So tonight, when you're drifting off to sleep, safe in your bed far from any river, remember this. Somewhere right now, a woman is crying. Maybe it's just a sad person having a bad night. Maybe it's grief made audible. Maybe it's history refusing to be silent. Or maybe it's her. Maybe La Llorona is still out there, walking the edges of rivers and canals, searching for something she lost so long ago she can barely remember what it looked like, calling out for children who will never answer, weeping for a life that can never be recovered. And maybe, just maybe, that's not a ghost story. That's just the sound of pain that has nowhere else to go. The sound of people who've been abandoned by systems, by men, by history itself, trying to be heard. La Llorona is still crying, still searching, still reminding us that some griefs don't heal, some wounds don't close, some losses don't end. She's been doing this for 500 years. She'll probably do it for 500 more. So if you ever find yourself near water at night and you hear a woman crying, asking, "Dónde están mis hijos?" you'll know who it is, and you'll know what to do. Don't follow the sound. Don't try to help. Don't engage. Just go somewhere else. Somewhere with light and people and life. Because La Llorona doesn't need your help. She's beyond help. She's beyond everything except the endless cycle of searching and crying, and taking and grieving. She's a warning. She's a tragedy. She's history that won't stay buried. She's grief that won't stay quiet. She's La Llorona, the weeping woman, and she's still here. Sleep well.